Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tigre. Our victim of the day is John Barker. He's the VP for Business Development of Loncor, which is an Africa gold play, and interestingly enough, one that I visited maybe almost 10 years ago now, I think. And gold's heating up. The story seems to be gaining some recent traction, so I thought it'd be interesting to get an update from John. So, John, why don't you give us an overview, and then I've got some questions for you.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Lobo. This is really a story from my point of view that's just come out from the shadows, probably in the last year. In essence, Kilo Gold came into Loncor just under a year ago, and with it came a number of assets. And it's those assets that we believe will push the share price upwards as value releases on those assets, but we'll touch on that in a moment. We're situated in the northeast of the DRC, and some of your viewers will be aware that Barrick Gold manages the Kibali gold mine up in that region. In fact, it's 220 kilometers away. So in a way, that's something we like to highlight up front because I think it gives a little bit of confidence that things can happen in that area. And when I say 220 kilometers away, it's about a day's drive to get a drilling rig down to us from the Kibali mine. That operation in itself, it was Randgold that brought it into the Barrick fold, but it's been a superb mine for Barrick. Last year, they talked about all-in costs sub $700 an ounce, and the production was 819,000 ounces. So they're really operating ahead of expectations. And so not only that, but obviously Barrick in that region is keen to look for, we're calling it Kibali 2. And they're obviously looking around their own deposits and below their own deposits. But around 4 years ago, the old Randgold went into a joint venture with Loncor in the area, 2,000, well, it's now 2,000 kilometers square of what's called the Ngayo Belt. And they've been carefully assessing the areas. And I think we're all aware how diligent Barrick are and looking for their tier one projects. And so they've done various early stage exploration, and eventually it's culminated in 2 months ago, them starting drilling on the joint venture with Loncor. That joint venture, Barrick is an earn-in to 65%. We'll have 35%. And that's after a pre-feasibility. So at feasibility point, we will then have to put up the money. So we're excited about what's happening there, but it's really the immediate excitement is what I said earlier on is what has come into the company in the last year. In particular, the 2.5 million ounces of open pit inferred resource at the Dumbi and two satellite deposits. It's sizable. I think, again, something that really excites us is that the grade, because within the open pit shell, it's 2.54 grams a ton, which is really, if you have a look at Kibali's resource, it's sitting at a very similar grade for their open pit resource. So fingers crossed that continues to be what appears to be a good-looking resource. We now fully financed, having raised $5 million to drill a Dumbi. It's got some areas where we need to do some infill drilling within the pit shell. And then we were putting 4 holes in there. So we'd hope to see, it's got to be a guesstimate, of course, but 500,000 ounces in the pit, taking that area to around 3 million ounces. And then going down below, 500, 600 meters below, we're looking at the underground potential. Again, very similar to what they've done at Kibali. We know there's a decent grade down there, 6-7 grams per ton from a couple of holes has been put in previously, but we obviously want to just do a little bit more work. So, as I say, fully funded. Drills are on their way to site, so in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, hopefully they'll start drilling. And we hoping to see information coming out of that for the remainder of this year. So once we have hopefully more ounces at a similar grade, and then we'd look to try and put some sort of value on that through a scoping study. If it comes anywhere near the margins on Kibali, then we're obviously looking at big figures coming out of that. But early stage, and I realize it's resource and all those provisos, but it's sort of heading the direction that you'd like to see. Um, and that's, I mean, we have also some exploration along strike, but early stage along strike from Adumbi. And we also have other ounces at other deposits in the area, which we own 100% of, at decent grades. There's one in particular, Macapella, where there's 1.2 million ounces of resources at grades that are sitting over 5 grams a ton. But that is something for the future. But in the short term, it's a Dumby that we believe will really drive the price.
All right. Just to be clear, Adumbi and Macapella are excluded from the Barrick JV. I wasn't sure on that looking over your presentation.
Yeah, that's right. We have around 3,500 kilometers in total in the Ngaio Belt. We dominate the Ngaio Belt. And the joint venture with Barrick is on around 2,000 kilometers squared. And as you say, the two deposits that I mentioned there, Adumbi, we have 84.68% off, and Macapella, we have 100% off, and obviously control both of them.
All right. And so the deal with Barrick must be it's a regional exploration JV, is there, and they get automatically 65% of anything discovered, or is there any kind of further earn-in or provisos depending on what's found?
Well, they themselves have their own parameters. You've heard them talk about on the tier ones looking for around 5 million ounces. So if the deposit, for example, doesn't come up to 5 million ounces, or whatever that parameter they think appropriate, maybe with a higher grade it's lower. But if it doesn't fit their parameters, then it drops back to Loncor for free. And within our shareholder base, we may well discuss it a little later, but we have Resolute owning the Australian gold producer that owns 26% of Loncor, and needless to say, they're looking for projects of interest to them.
Sure.
So it's nice to have these various options. If, for example, Barrick doesn't take it, there's no definitive agreement with Resolute that they take it, but obviously Resolute is there for a reason. But as I say, once we get to that feasibility study, we'll put it into a special purpose vehicle, and we'll split it 35-65, and also, of course, the government will take its 10% at that point too.
Understood. Yeah, no, I was just asking because it's fairly common when you're doing early stage exploration like that with a major that, as you say, they don't always find something that's big enough for them, but it can be of interest to the juniors. So it's good to know that you have a shot at that if it doesn't. Okay, so let's get back to Adumbi. I looked over the presentation, and it's relatively high grade for an open pit, but this isn't a disseminated deposit. It's not just a giant blob of stuff there you can scoop out of a pit. It's a vertical structure or sub-vertical, and there's only so far down you can go on the pit. So I'm wondering about the exploration potential there, and it looks like it's open primarily at depth. So if you do extend it, how much farther down can you go before you start having to look at an underground mining scenario? And the grades for an open pit look great, but are they really good enough to support underground mining?
Yeah, well, on the first thing, we increased the resource at Adumbi back in April on the Adumbi deposit itself by 61%, and that was through incorporation of some holes that hadn't been put in and some other recalculations. But one of the other key factors was changing the pit to a $1,500 gold price. And so what you see in the presentation, which of course you can see on our website, that's where we calculate the pit to be at 1,500. We do have strike on our side. I mean, you're looking at in excess of 4 kilometers lengthwise, and then the two satellite deposits of Manzako and Katango to go in as well. And then hopefully we have other regional, at Imbo East, where we're doing the regional exploration, something will come up there. But going on to the underground potential, yeah, we obviously need to do more work. But if you look at some of the grades and widths that we got, and I mentioned to you before, we incorporated some holes into that resource increase. Just looking at those holes, I've got them here in front of me. True width sitting at 11 meters, 5.51, one hole. 7 meters sitting at 3, 14 meters at 8. So there seems to be a high-grade shoot. Again, very similar, if you're going to have a look at the Kibali results, very similar to what they're mining successfully. So the thought of putting a decline potentially down, who knows? I mean, that obviously will have to be worked out nearer the time in a number of years' time. But as you'll have seen on many occasions, driving a decline at the bottom of a pit to access these high-grade zones is often a pretty efficient way to access it. So we're very encouraged by what we see. And certainly Peter Cowley, our president, he is very encouraged too, and he's been responsible for finding over 30 million ounces, been on top of the development of the Gator deposit, which in Tanzania, etc. So a very experienced guy, and he's very comfortable with the grades and the geology that he's seeing emerging at depth.
All right, so just to be clear then, looking at the exploration plan on one of the slides in your presentation, it looked to me like the plan for the immediate future was to test the deposit at depth. But you're saying it is still open on strike as well. And if that's the case, why not test the strike extensions first? That seems like that would be the lower hanging fruit, easier to do.
Yeah, look, I must admit, those sort of things, we follow the guidance of Peter, who's been there, seen it and done it with these deposits in these areas. I think the first point is that the immediate 4 holes are essentially infill drilling.
Yes, I did see that.
So that's, as you say, low-hanging fruit. It doesn't get much more straightforward than that. We do have drill holes below. Historically, we have a series of holes above. So we're pretty comfortable that those 4 holes are going to bring in significant ounces, as we've said, hopefully at the grade that's been consistent out there. And so we decided the rigs are sitting in that area, and we're going to just step out and test the depth there. If this all goes to plan, there's no doubt we'll step it out. We'll have the drill rigs there. We'll look to step out along strike. But I think we're just looking to assess and look to increase resources in this specific area.
Well, that's actually a pretty good answer. I mean, if you've got obvious targets, infill targets, and then you don't even have to move the drill, just turn it down and drill underneath. Logistically, why remobilize if you can potentially expand the deposit there? So that makes sense to me. All right.
Yeah, and I think just carrying on from what you're saying too, of course, now you can put wedges in as well, and you can take advantage that way. It's economic to put wedges through, and so we'll be looking at all of those things with this drilling program.
Right. Okay. And you say drills are on the way, and that's all fully permitted, and so maybe results by the end of the year? Or
we'd certainly hope that before the end of the year we'll be seeing results coming out from there. The last I heard, they're at the border. Border crossing's a little slow. Things like COVID just slowing up paperwork. And you're probably hearing that from a lot of the people you're speaking to. But we've seen from Barrick, for example, that moved their 2 drill rigs onto the JV back recently. That once it's through the border, then we get it down and cleared at the Kibali mine, and then it takes a day to get down, and things move pretty quickly. So Barrick managed to drill a couple of holes within less than a month. So we'd expect to see a number of results before year end.
Right. And sorry, I don't want to get too sidetracked. I still have other questions. But so Barrick has drilled some holes already, and you have assays pending from the JV. But they're a major, so if they find something that it could actually be significant for you, but it may not be material for them, are you able to press release anything, or do you have to wait for them to do it first?
Well, they are in control of the program, but at the same time, we've made it very clear to them that if there's price-sensitive information that may affect our share price, then there is an obligation for them to release that information to us. As you say, it may not be price-sensitive to them, but if it is to us, then there's that obligation to release it. But I think looking at that JV, we just touching on the JV, they took this long time, a lot longer than we would have liked, of course, 4 years. But they're very diligent. Mark Bristow is a very diligent sort of guy, as I'm sure you're aware. And they came through with a number at the time. Initially, it was 6 targets that they said had moved through the various early stage parameters to be tier 1 targets. They've drilled the first one, Angaluca, and it's really scoping drilling, just putting a few holes, I think, to get an idea of structure, and already they've moved on to the second structure. So it's very much an early stage drilling, just to get a feel for what's there. I think that's the luxury the majors have, of course. Again, if we were drilling them, we would probably stick on the one deposit and put a few more holes in. But that is the reality, the difference that we're aware. They do things differently to the way we would do it.
Yeah, no, that's
so that's on to the second target currently.
That is pretty typical.
Use if when it's available.
Yeah, no, that is pretty typical. If it's big enough for us, we can put 2 holes 500 meters apart. We should hit it. Yeah. All right, no, I get that. Okay, so I had another question though. A Dumby, it is what it is, but you have higher grades at Macapella. So why is a Dumby the highest priority in Macapella, sort of Plan B?
Yeah, you'll see that Macapella is, this one from a dump. Macapella has been drilled out historically, and we've looked at it, and we have the information, and we've got the inferred and indicated, and there's no doubt that we will be looking at putting holes into Macapella because, as you said, and I'm the same as you, it's a very exciting prospect with with those grades of over 5 grams a ton, and you've got a very long strike sitting there at Macapella too. It's a little more sort of the various pits along the way, but nevertheless very exciting, and that one we're keeping in our pocket. The reason we focused on a Dumby is because when we got the assets in from Kilo, we obviously looked across them, and we looked at what the consultants in Kilo, when Kilo had it, had recommended. And Kilo had focused on other areas. And only right at the end did they start putting holes into a Dumby and concentrating on a Dumby. And the net result of that was they had these 4 holes, which is still within our pit, that they drilled and got those grades that I expressed earlier on, high grades, 5 grades, 8 grades over width. But they hadn't incorporated them into their resource calculation. So when we went through the consultant's report as to what needed to be done, they said, have a look at the drill results, reassess them, things like have a look at the SG, mineralogy, met recoveries. So we did that under Peter Cowley's watchful eye and using consultants ourselves. And then, of course, they said incorporate those 4 holes that hadn't been incorporated. They were drilled in 2017. So they were sitting there in the middle of this good-looking pit, but hadn't been incorporated. And when we did incorporate it and reassessed and did all those things and obviously changed the pit shell to a 1500, we saw the 62% increase in resources. So that's not a bad, for doing not a lot, essentially, apart from reassessing. We got a 62% increase in resources. So yeah, Macapella's sitting there, but this seemed like a fairly straightforward way to move, and it's obviously our focus in the short term.
And sorry, so the Dumby gets drilled first because of that low-hanging fruit, those targets.
Yeah, well, we didn't have to drill anything. We just had to go in there.
I get that.
We didn't have cash available, and this allowed us to come out with a much larger resource, and then obviously tell a better story. Because prior to that, we didn't have that much of a story.
I get that, though, and the higher gold price helped with that too. I get that, but still, you're not gonna drill Macapella first. You're gonna drill a Dumby first, and that's because it has the lowest risk targets.
That's right. Yeah.
And assuming success in financing, then would you go ahead and drill Macapella, or do you need to find something, permits or anything else to move forward there, or what happens to Macapella? What and when happens to Macapella?
Macapella, well, as it stands at present, so we hope to get the results in towards the end of the year and look to put in a forward with the scoping study with a Dumby. Hopefully with the margins we said and much larger ounces, and I think it'll be a very impressive initial assessment of the project. So, I think shareholders will be happy if that goes to plan as we would like it to unfold. I think it's going to be really a very significant initial economic assessment. Once we have that, then we'll be looking definitely at Macapella, and for all the reasons that you said. And I must admit, when I joined the company, was now about 5 months ago, I looked at it in the same way as you're looking at it, thinking, holy, that's an impressive looking deposit. So that's very much on the radar. And I think one of the key things to remember about this story is you're getting exposure to Adumbi, which we hope will be expanding, and for around $15 a resource ounce. Granted, it's inferred and indicated, but around $15 a resource ounce. And we're talking about $1,000 operating margins on Kibali. So it's an option on the potential.
Understand.
But beyond that, you then receive the upside from this drilling at Dumbi, the upside potentially at Macapella, the upside from regional exploration, and exposure to Barrick's quest to find that Kibali too, all three. So that's the sort of in essence of the story that we're trying to tell here is early stage. Nobody knows about it. It's all developing. And there's a lot to come out hopefully in the next 12 months, including, I think, Macapella's in that plan.
All right. Well, it may not be fair to ask since you are new with the company, and the story has changed quite a bit since I was there 10 years ago or whatever it was. But at the time there was quite a bit of excitement over Newmont's involvement. I think Newmont still remains a shareholder, a minority shareholder. But do you know what happened with that? It seems like.
Yeah, look, Newmont were instrumental, I think, in assessing the ground. If you were on the ground, you know how vast it is and how difficult it is to move around in early stage exploration. It really is quite difficult. So they came in and they allowed, essentially working with our team, they're using the LiDAR technology, and that allowed really the company to focus and start isolate areas of interest. So they were instrumental in those early few years. But really, Newmont, I think, started to look elsewhere outside of the DRC, and so they're still there, and we're still speaking to them regularly, and I think they're supportive of the direction we're going. But obviously, as you know, they developed into other countries in Africa, and then the Resolute. Just looking at the shareholders, the Resolute holding. That essentially came in from the Kilo. Resolute were involved with Kilo, and then when Kilo became a part of Loncor, Resolute came in as a major shareholder, and currently 26%. And obviously, they supported what we're doing.
Alrighty. Well, okay, so let's talk then about Africa for a bit. I understand that it's a big continent. Not all the countries are the same. Not even all the regions within the countries are the same. And the DRC itself is a huge country. That having been said, the headlines coming out of Africa just never seem good. We've got a coup in Mali, not so long ago. Previously very stable places like Cote d'Ivoire suddenly have a coup and a contested election and all this stuff. And then periodic Ebola outbreaks. What do you tell an investor who's concerned about, country risk where you're working?
Yes. I think the easiest way from our perspective when we're speaking to investors is really just to touch on what's happening currently in the country. I mean, if a country's going backwards, then you wouldn't expect to see an increase in the level of investment. But I think many people in the mining field will be aware that things are happening now in the DRC that they weren't before. I mean, it was just this week that Rob Friedland with Ivanhoe, I think, announced very positive things are going on at their copper project, Kakula copper project there. And that one has an NPV over $5 billion. So they're pushing hard and reading the news releases suggesting that they're ahead of schedule. We touched on Kibali itself. I think it was forecasting 800,000, produced 819,000. So they're going ahead. I see Tesla's just tied up with Glencore on a cobalt project. The Chinese are there, China Moly are there, and then AngloGold Ashanti are in Kibali with Barrick. So things are happening there. Not only happening, but they're ahead of expectations in the case of, as I say, what appears to be the case down at Ivanhoe's project and Kibali. So that's sort of, I suppose, the proof's in the pudding from that point of view. That's not to say there's not issues. I think we've both been around long enough that this valuation paradigm that's been Africa for a long time. I remember when I was an analyst at RBC, I used to stand up at Cape Town and try and explain the valuation paradigm between Africa sector versus Australia versus North America. And it's still there. There's no doubt. But never, having said all of that, when the gold price runs, there's very interesting projects to look at. Hopefully, we're one of them. Things like Ebola, yeah, they are there. I think currently it's the 11th outbreak. But we must also put that into some sort of perspective. It's sitting about 400, 500 miles away from where we are. There was one major outbreak over Guinea, Liberia. Over, I think, 26,000 people died. But the more recent ones have been, you're talking about 50, 60, 70 people dying, being contained very swiftly. The teams are getting adept at isolating the areas, monitoring like we're doing with COVID. And then obviously there's a vaccine too. So I know, for example, this 11th outbreak they spoke about, it was announced, I think, at the beginning of June. At the end of August, there'd been 100 recorded cases, and I think 43 deaths, and the teams were in there really clamping it down. I think the previous outbreak before that, I think it was sub 100 deaths as well. So it's a terrible disease, but there seems to be, a handle on this. And from our perspective, of course, having a relatively small team on the ground, plus or minus 10 people most of the time, and vaccinated, it's not impacting us, it's not impacting Barrick, it's not impacting these other ones. I think a lot of them are the same with COVID. And as far as the country risk is concerned, yeah, there is country risk. I think this is where I point to Arnie Condrath, our CEO. 30 years, he's been through 4 or 5 different presidents, and he's seen a lot of things happen. He's learned a lot on the way, and come out of it with even more gold. Our teams discovered close to 15 million ounces of resources in the DRC over 20 to 30 years, depending on who you're speaking to, from Peter Cowley, our geologist, through to Arnie. So we have a history, and that history is important. And it's not just knowing the president and etc. It's all the way down into the regional offices and the district offices, just to make things happen in a efficient, appropriate way, in order for you to get projects that deliver more rather than less, as we're seeing now with Ivanhoe and Barrick. So you can operate. It is Africa. I mean, I've lived in Africa for a long time. I've been involved in African companies for 30 years. It's different. It's exciting. And there's lots of stories to tell. You just like to hope that there's more good stories for you to tell than not so good, and learn from those stories that are not so good in order to release value effectively. So, yeah. I wanted to say, the DRC is a huge country. You touched on it. People realize it's about a quarter of the size of the US. Yeah, so you might hear something happening in the DRC, but it's like California is different to Montana, and it's a different world sometimes there. And we, touch wood, have been fortunate where we're working, and there's just it's an area that's been stable, and I say proven by Barrick with Kibali going from strength to strength.
Sure, not to beat on that to death too much, but just I remember getting in the chopper with the Loncor guys back then, and flying over and seeing the UN tents and the tank emplacements there to try to keep the peace along the border with Rwanda and so on. Just really briefly, military situation there, all calm recently, or is the UN still there, or is the UN still there, or is that no longer necessary?
The UN have a presence, and it's more a monitoring force, and from time to time, obviously they step in as required. Between the UN and then you obviously have a number of international medical. There's eyes and ears keeping an eye on life in their various areas. But touch wood, historically there is conflict down in the diamond areas to the south and tied into various other dynamics, but that seems to have settled down too. So it seems like currently, things are moving forward. Hence, you're seeing this significant investment into the country.
All righty. Well, switching gears a little bit here, back to your company, your share price, which is really why we're talking. I couldn't help but notice that we had this huge breakout in gold prices in July and August, $2,000 gold. And whereas your stock just didn't seem to respond to that at all, it recovered from the March meltdown and then it's just been sort of flat since then. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think until we announced that Adumbi 62% resource upgrade, there wasn't so much of a story. So they weren't effectively telling it. Didn't The company didn't have a lot of money either. So it's not like we were aggressively pushing the story. I think we knew that we had this potential upgrade in Adumbi in our back pocket. So it was very much a story sitting in the dark, and subsequently, of course, COVID slowed our start out of the blocks, and so we were caught a little bit in that. So we're now aggressively stepping up. You'll see that if you're looking at our presentation, a very focused presentation, and we have these various elements and to tell investors. So we're really picking up, I think, on the IR promotional element to get our story known. So that's the first thing, and then secondly, in order for us to do the drilling and move ahead, we need to raise some money. So it took us a month and a half to raise around 5 million after we initially announced it. 5 million Canadian, which sees us fully funded now for the drilling if we want to do the Dumbi. But I mean, once you start doing that, then I think automatically people thinking, hold on, it's going to be at a discount, the price is going to be below the prevailing price, maybe we should go for a stock that's got an open run at the gold price rather than something that might be held back by a private placement pricing. So and if you wanted stock, you got involved in the private placement at that lower price of 50 cents. So that was obviously holding us back as well, but that's now out, that's all clear. And so we'd hope to see now that our work, things like we're doing with yourself, telling the story and actually coming out with decent drill results. Hopefully that will see our price re-rate.
All right, fair enough. Well, normally I wrap these interviews up by asking the skin in the game question. I happen to know that Arnie has a huge amount of skin in this game, so I'm not worried about management's alignment with shareholders here. But I'm talking to you, so I got to ask, are you putting any of your own money into this story?
Yeah, look, I will be. I'm on a contract currently, and so I think when my contract comes up, I'm on a 12-month contract to make sure that we're all speaking at the end of 12 months within the firm, and then I think going forward, well, if not before, I'll be looking to put something into the company. The trouble is, we've got so much news coming out. I've been fairly restricted. I mean, if you look at our news flow, it's been one after another. So it's been quite difficult to get my lawyer to agree for a window to let me invest. But it's certainly, I mean, I'm very fortunate to land in this company at the time that I did, because I think it's a lot of exciting things, and it's certainly something I'll be looking to put some money into.
Darn those blackout periods. I guess nobody's going to complain about news flow. All right, John, I get it. I understand. Great overview. I appreciate your time. Keep us posted. Let us know how it goes. And for everybody out there, thank you for watching. If you are watching this on YouTube, please click that subscribe link. It helps us out a lot. And visit us at independentspeculator.com for more interviews and more useful information like this. Thank you, John. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.